We knew how to train and coach and teach pretty quickly. What consumed a massive amount of our time was doing interviews, calling agents, trying to get them to come into play. Like, I had to learn those skills. Like, those weren't skills I just got right off the bat. It definitely takes a farm to run a real estate team at times. And part of that process is when to hire what pieces to continue to scale. Obviously, we're a lot bigger than a lot of people will get, and we're still missing a couple pieces in our organization. The team that you're personally selling transactions for, this is the biggest punch in the face that team leaders don't like to see. This is what Refuge is all about. Getting punched in the mouth to start looking at the numbers that actually matter and why you can't get to the next level. If you're trying to build a big team like we did, and you're trying to scale quickly, honestly, one of the quickest hires that I probably would have done faster is some form of...
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Refuge Playbook Series podcast. This is your host, Danny Gould, with the number one team leader in Arizona, Keith Anderson. Keith, welcome to the Playbook, brother.
Man,
I'm excited for today, man. I'm stoked.
No, I'm pumped.
So today we're going to talk about the phases of growing a team, right? From the ground up. And so maybe for context, you can give people like an idea of where you're at right now, and then we can start like hey, if you were to do it all over again to build like your prototypical like team, where would you start and how would you grow? What's your first hire, et cetera?
Yeah, no, that's great. So we have just over 140 agents, so I think we're like 147 as of today. We have, I believe, 12 staff members now. I'd have to double check that we have 12 full-time on staff here, local, in person, and we have 9 VAs that are overseas. So, together, plus we have 6 owners too. So that's kind of a unique box for us as well. 3 owners are primary builders of the business. The other 3 work on ancillary pieces and just different facets of the business. And so it definitely takes a farm to run a real estate team at times. It takes a huge box. And so part of that process is when to hire what pieces to continue to scale. Obviously, we're a lot bigger than a lot of people will get. And we're still missing a couple pieces in our organization. We still have 1 or 2 boxes we're trying to satisfy and fill. And what ends up happening is over time, the type of roles you need to adjust, the amount of roles you need to adjust, and what you thought you did need in the past, you end up cleaning up with other roles and unique new roles that you come up with. So it makes it exciting. And obviously you're going to we'll chat about the transaction coordinator, sales manager, recruiter, marketer. Like, you have all of these type of trainer, all of these different types of roles that are there. But the question is, when do you hire them? Like, how soon, how often, how many? And then obviously get into the weeds of how much do you even pay these people? Like, what's their value to your organization, and how do you quantify that, and so forth. So we can dig into it from when we first started. But at the end of the day, it depends is going to be the answer on a lot of these things. And it really, what it depends on is the type of leader that you are as an individual. So the listeners that are listening to this, you have to first digest what type of leader you are individually. What are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? Because if you spend 99% of your time trying to learn how to better your weaknesses instead of just hiring someone that's already great at those things, your ability to scale quickly is diminished greatly. So those are things we learned right off the bat. And typically that's why some of the early hires are what they are with a small team into a big team, because typically great leaders and entrepreneurs aren't good at certain tasks that can be easily hired quickly and effectively. So yeah, where do you want to begin? We have 3 office locations as well. So that's going to affect staffing also, right? So we have a Scottsdale office, a Chandler East Valley office, and a West Valley office as well. So those differences also increase, the amount of power that you need per office.
Yeah, and for context here, 12 staff, 9 VAs, 147 agents. What's the unit count on that, and what's the volume on that?
We should do anywhere from 800 to 1,000 this year, even in a little slower year. Our volume will probably be close to 400 to 500 million in production. It'll fall somewhere in there, depending on how good we finish out the rest of this year.
Nice. Awesome. Okay, cool. Well, why don't we start at the beginning? Because I'm sure that anyone who's listening right now is perhaps in like varying degrees of the team building journey, right? And I'm curious to know, like, maybe what was your first hire, right? What was the first step that you took? Obviously, you were in production for a certain amount of time, and then you decided to step away, or not step away, but make your first hire. And would you do that? Would you make that same hire all over again? Or if not, what would you do instead?
Yeah. So like we talked about, the first hire you should make and the first hire I make might be completely different for me versus another team leader out there. And so it starts with evaluating your skill sets and your strengths. 99% of the time, which I haven't met very many leaders that are good at this other skill set, typically transaction coordination is the first thing to be hired out because it's fairly a low cost activity to outsource. And typically, great salespeople, leaders, and entrepreneurs are horribly unorganized as it is. So to ask them to do transaction coordination is almost like the biggest pain point for anybody's business. Like the last thing I wanted to do was open up a dot loop or a SkySlope and try and manage a file and make sure all of my paperwork was in order. Like that's literally the last thing I want to do on the face of the earth. Knowing that was really easy to make a decision on our first hire because immediately we could outsource all of that time by a simple cost. And the key here is to stay variable for as long as you possibly can. So some people just run and just start hiring salaried people because they're like, we're going to start a company and like, we need to have staff. And they end up hiring 3 or 4 staff and they don't even have enough revenue to oversee the staff that they hired. So to start variable is really key. So pay more money on a per file basis until you have easy line of sight of predictability for income. That's like the biggest mistake people make is they go hire a $40,000 to $50,000 salaried transaction coordinator. They have a slow month and now they're in the hole trying to catch themselves back up. And that's just because they didn't make the right type of decision hiring. So for us, we hired a transaction coordinator, paid them a per file basis. It could be anywhere from 300 to 400, depending on buyers and sellers, a file. And we mapped it out. Like at what point, how many files do we have to close to surpass the amount of money we'd be paying them on a per file basis versus what a salary could be to have them on staff full time just for our team. Like you got to evaluate that box. And you can't just hit it for the first time and just be like, okay, we're good. Let's hire them full time. No, you need to have a percentage over that and hit a regular basis. Like I would say 90 days at that mark minimum before you start to really consider hiring a full-time staff, because in all reality, being able to shift and make decisions and change is way more valuable than the extra few $100s that you would have saved by hiring a salaried person versus a per file basis. Like that sense of security and ability to shift and adapt is massively beneficial early on in your business. So transaction coordinator was the quickest one for us. We were already natural leaders and salespeople, so it was really easy to teach and train. Like that was kind of already our bucket. We were really good at that. So that didn't need to be an early hire. Same thing with like sales management and like helping, just overall help push production because of those same pieces.
Sure.
Now, then you get your team, because remember, as a team leader, you're wearing every hat. You build out an org chart just the same. So essentially, even as a small team, your org chart looks exactly like mine. The difference is as a team leader, you're in every single position. That's the only difference. So you're a recruiter, sales manager, leader, trainer, coach, financial advisor, tax, like everything. You're doing all of it, right? You don't have a personal assistant. You can't afford one yet. Like if you're being smart about it. So you're building everything from scratch. And you have to also understand that you are that person. So I'm also COO. I'm also CTO. I'm also dealing with all process and system build outs. And so that's on the leader. So you got to be really careful outsourcing that stuff too quickly until you get your agent count up to a certain point where you can start outsourcing and start hiring prior to you actually affording it, because that opportunity dollar matters greatly. So I know we've talked on other playbooks and other podcasts when it comes to what type of team structure you're going to be. This also evaluates quite a bit when it comes to what staff to hire next and where you want to go. So if you're going to be a rainmaker team model, for instance, you're not jumping out of the gates trying to go find a recruiter. Like your goal is not to scale and quickly, effectively build a big team. You only need 4 or 5 agents. So in essence, you should never hire that role. Like you should do that yourself. And because it's a small team, you should be the recruiter for the life of the team. You don't need to hire that role out because you're never going to have enough agents to make sense of it. What might make more sense to hire would be more like a sales manager or a personal trainer or coach, so that you're not wasting all of your time training every single one of your, partner agents, learning how to do every single thing in the sales process. Whereas your best use of a per dollar activity when you run a rainmaker team is doing production, handing some of those deals off to your team. But if you're spending 85% of your time teaching, training, coaching, helping people learn how to navigate the MLS, running comps, like if you're doing that stuff, how much production did you lose from your overall revenue? You also got to think of dollar, per activity, in the sense of every transaction you hand off at a 50% split, you need 2 of those deals to equal 1 of your own transactions. So if you can't build that out at scale, then it becomes a waste of your time to really grow efficiently. Now, if you're trying to build a big team like we did, and you're trying to scale quickly, honestly, one of the quickest hires that I probably would have done faster is some form of recruiter or, a growth advisor in that bucket quickly, because we knew how to train and coach and teach pretty quickly. What consumed a massive amount of our time was doing interviews, calling agents, trying to get them to come into play. Like I had to learn those skills. Like those weren't skills I just got right off the bat. Like I knew how to do everything involving real estate. So me jumping in front of a classroom and teaching a quick class was easy. Like coaching somebody on how to do more sales or leading from the front in production was an easier activity for us to do than it would be recruiter. However, we did it backwards when we were scaling, because we thought the mindset of, I would rather remove items that I'm doing on a regular basis so that I could free up my time, versus the thought of the quickest way to grow a team effectively is actually recruiting. Like you need more agents to support and train. That is the number one quickest form of income in a real estate team, and to get out of production. It actually follows almost perfectly in line. So you typically about 5 to 10 agents, somewhere in that bucket. That is where you need to be for that rainmaker model, or that first step in a team model. You need to get a transaction coordinator on staff, hired on, probably in that 5 to 10 agent box. It's all based around that and revenue. After 10 agents, keep in mind, you're still in production. So that transaction coordinator is doing a lot of your own deals. That's why you can afford them. And at scale, you probably you need to start looking at your next hire around 20 agents or so. That's your next box. Okay. So 5 to 10 is your first box. You better have a transaction coordinator by 10. 5 is really kind of your middle box of starting to look, but 10 is really where you need to be. If you don't have a transaction coordinator at 10, you need to stop what you're doing and go find one. Especially if you're doing any type of good level of production. If you're trying to scale a team out quickly, this is where that decision comes into play. Would you be a better recruiter instead of hiring that out? Or would you be a better trainer, coach, and salesperson, right? If you're not patient, if you're not comfortable teaching the same shit over and over and over and over again, then you might want to really caution yourself about being a coach and a trainer, because you might get fed up with that really quickly and it will self-destruct your business on that side. Whereas with recruiting, it's just pure sales. So you could do interviews and lock them in, bring them in, and help build that process out a little bit more effectively. Or vice versa, which is typically the route most people go, is they're better at the sales, the coaching, the training. That's why they want to start a real estate team anyways. Right. They like teaching other agents. They already teach them a lot of stuff. So if that's your goal, then around that 15 to 20 agent count, you need to hire a recruiter. Like that's your number one best asset to have on play. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be a trained to the T recruiter. It needs to be someone that can handle that job, a salesperson potentially that can just recruit, that can make cold calls, that can, invite people to come in, do an interview, add them onto your team, so forth. They don't have to be the best of the best recruiter. Think about it. If you're only at 20 agents or so, you only need 3 to 5 agents a month to really start scaling quickly. Like 5 agents would 25% growth quickly. Like that's a lot of growth, and you're going to outgrow yourself. So that's the next piece is your recruiter, in my opinion. 90% of the time, that's what the team should do.
Just to clarify here, hire one is a TC. And then we're saying, okay, the next hire should be either someone who is 100% dedicated to recruiting, or someone who's 100% dedicated to training, onboarding, and sales management. And sales management.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, because early on, can also use your transaction coordinator or executive admin tasks. Like you see a lot of people do that for a certain period of time. But when you get to 10 to 20 agents, they can't do that anymore. They're probably running multiple files and they can't, work at that capacity.
What's interesting is, that's actually how we did it, right? So originally I had a per file TC, someone that would just do, per file. And that, and then eventually I hired an admin, right? To take care of all the admin, there's just a lot of stuff with the listings and everything but when I hired her and I basically told her, I said, hey, listen, within the next year, you're going to take over transaction coordination. And so I put her through like TC school and CAR, the California Association of Realtors, has a bunch of TC classes, whatever. So I put her through all that. And then at the end of it, I was like, all right, now it's, now it's your time, your turn to take over the files. So you're right. Like eventually she took over the TC work and was the admin. And you're also right, around the 20 agent mark is when she started pulling out her hair and was like, hey, I can't do this anymore. And so we had to kind of segment the rollout, but it's very true.
So, and think about it at scale. One of my best recommendations as well, and I would not, something I would have done differently, is we went the route of teaching and training a couple TCs from agents into a TC role. It's not the way to go. Mm-hmm. Some agents and teams might have success of it. If you're a good producing team and you're growing at scale, go find a good freaking TC and pay them. You need that.
Yep.
You need someone that knows what they're doing. They already have systems and processes in play. They can help you build your transaction systems and process.
Yep.
We were really lucky with the TC that we were able to partner with. Now we have one managing TC running our entire company at 800 plus transactions a year. Now they are able to do that because we have 4 VAs to support them. But that's where the scale out comes into play. The other thing you see a lot of teams make, a lot of mistakes that teams make, is they go hire 2-3 TCs, 3 admins. And I'm like, you have a team of 20 and you have 3 admin, 2 of which are TCs. One's a transaction coordinator, one's a listing coordinator, one's a executive assistant. And I'm like, why do you have all of this when a VA is pennies on the dollar compared to what a full in-staff person is, and you'll probably get twice the work out of them as well. So that's the next thing that I would consider when you start getting to that next scale. So that kind of carries us into the next box. We now have, hopefully in this box, you have a recruiter. Okay. You now have a transaction coordinator helping you grow and scale your team. At this time, you have 20 agents and you're probably still in production. But now this is the problem, is you're stressing because you have so many agents that need your help and support, but you're also still selling real estate to pay the bills, because what the agents are producing is not enough to cover the expenses of your scaling team. If you stayed at that rainmaker model, like we talked about, where you're full production go and you only have one executive assistant / TC, it's a lot easier to maintain expenses. It really, really is. But once you choose to go the large team route, now you're at about 20 agents. What's ripping your time is the agents. They need your help. They want you to have a one-on-one. They need coaching with this. They need training with this. Now you're building all your time, creating trainings and creating team meetings and overseeing staff. Like, you are now turning into a business manager. You're no longer a real estate agent. Like, it's starting to finally change.
Yep.
So you have to sprint to 40 agents as quickly as you possibly can in a perfect world. And the next hire, you have to make a decision. Do you want to get out of production at this point? Or do I want to stay in production and replace my role as a trainer, coach, sales manager, and productivity asset? When you do that, your team's production numbers will drastically go down because it's not you doing it anymore. But you can offset that with your own personal production. If you choose to go the other way and you choose to, not to get out of production and stay the sales manager and coach, you can do that too, but you better freaking push those sales numbers up to be able to cover your cost, because you are going to be what I call like the valley of death right here for a team. That 20 to 40 agent count on a push and getting out of the business of sales is where all teams go to die. They all die there. They start losing money. You better have enough resources to last at least 6 months of a burn, and you better be able to push through that gap. The other thing that's really important here is you better have large enough team splits to compensate you enough to make that leap. Because if you have really lean splits, like you see some mentorship teams have, or some just kind of oversight teams, they will suck you dry of time and money, and you won't be able to make that gap. So this is where you really talk to yourself and you decide, okay, do I want to run a massive team or not? And do I want to stay in production? Like if you like selling real estate, my advice is always stay small. Sell as much real estate as you possibly can. Hire staff that replaces your tasks. Keep your business as lean as you possibly can. Hire agents on need, not necessarily on desire to grow a big team, and make your money through sales and offload all your other work. If you're going to grow a scalable team, the 20 to 40 is death. You got to get through that gap, and you got to get your production higher enough to cover costs and pay yourself, essentially.
Right. So 20 to 40 agents. And by the way, we're talking agent count too, but I think it's also important to talk about production numbers, because I think that there's a wide variability I know some teams who have 10 agents that produce way more than teams who have 40. Right. So what is the per agent productivity on a model like this?
So 2 different teams, remember?
Yep.
The team that you're personally selling transactions for, okay? This is the biggest punch in the face that team leaders don't like to see. This is what Refuge is all about. Getting punched in the mouth to start looking at the numbers that actually matter and why you can get to the next level. If you're counting your own production while you're in production as team production, you're doing it wrong. You cannot count your own production. So you see these teams that are like, oh no, we're doing great. We're doing like 23 deals a month. We're doing awesome. Like we're killing the game. We have, this many agents. And I'm like, but you did 7 or 8 of those transactions. So that's not the case. You're running a team that's doing 10 to 12. Now, if you took away your production, can you pay yourself, pay your staff, cover expenses, and do everything you need to do with 10 to 12 transactions a month? Can you do that? And most of the time, the team leader's like, no, like there's no way. I'm making way more than that right now. And I'm like, okay, your team is not doing 20 plus transactions a month. You are. You're the reason that's grinding like that.
Right.
So your company, which you're an owner of, is not. They're basically all glorified assistants until you can separate your production away from there. So this is the key. When you run a lean team, it's a lot easier for agents to get 2 to 3 transactions a month per agent. Like that's much easier to do because you can take a look at their accounts. You can look at their leads. You're handing off a lot of those deals to them. It's easier for them to stumble into those transactions. When you're building a sizable team, the metric that we use as a baseline to help with scalability and growth is a half a deal per agent per month. And we have never gone below that threshold. That is a key growth scalability threshold. So I got to look at what's my per revenue per transaction from my team members. I need to look at my average splits, and I need to look at all that data. So most teams are range anywhere from 1,500 to 4,000, depending on split structure and things like that on average. So I need to look at that, and I need to back in my numbers of what I need to be to remove myself from production. So how much do you need to make per month? How much do you need to cover all your expenses? And then you should have a little bit of percentage overage for profit. And then once you have that dollar amount, take your average revenue per transaction and divide it by that, so you know how many deals on average per month you need to equate that goal. Then you multiply that number, how many transactions you have, by 2. That will give you the total agent count you need to equate to that much transactions, which equates to that much revenue. So that's the easiest way to quickly predict your scalable income on your real estate team. what that typically looks like, and the reason why I say it that way, because you can keep between 20 and 40 agents, you can still stay pretty lean operationally. It's not till you break 40 to where, in order to get through that plateau, you need to start hiring staff to help you scale again. Uh-huh. But that 20 to 40 range, you keep it pretty lean. So if you're at 40 agents, that would be, you should be hitting that 20 transactions a month at a minimum threshold. That's your minimum. That's your floor. At 20 transactions a month, let's do state estimates, and let's just say $2,500 a file. Okay. And you're doing 20 files a month. That's $50,000 a year, right? Like, I think that adds up.
50 a month.
50K a year. Yeah. 50 a month. Yeah.
Yep.
At 50K a month, you should be able to cover 3 salaries that on a small team. Should be pretty easy. Recruiter, sales manager, and a transaction coordinator and or assistant, like whatever that looks like. Okay. Then the rest is for you and starting to set stuff aside to build your process. Like, you need that money to get out of sales and also take that next leap. So that's why the race to 40 is tough, because if you're losing production, you have to get those transactions high enough to cover your staff and yourself. And so that's, the difference between 20 agents with just 10 transactions, that's 25 grand. So the difference between 25 grand and 50 grand is a humongous leap when it comes to still having the same amount of staff, same amount of costs. We're not even talking about CRMs and listing costs and all of those other packages that cost money. Rent, if you have a lease space, all of those things come into play. So to get from 25 to 50K a month in revenue is a big leap. And that's typically the leap that team leaders die. And that's why per agent count matters. So you need to know what your baseline is, how much revenue it is per transaction. And then you backdoor it to how many agents do I need to equate to that many files based on that half a deal per agent average.
And that is, again, just to clarify, excluding your personal production. So you don't want to include your personal.
Yeah. Because you're going to lose it.
Right.
Yep. You'll lose it once you scale.
Right.
You can't count something that you won't have.
Right. So what you're saying is like, hey, we need to make sure that this business is sustainable without my personal production being counted. Because with my personal production, I'm a millionaire. I'm making tons of money. But then the second that you leave, right? Which, dude, let me tell you, like, I can speak from personal experience. It is a punch in the gut when you, like, the first time, like, when you really realize, you're like,
huge pay cut.
I'm used to, bankrolling a lot of dough on a monthly basis. And then all of a sudden, like, I made 15 grand last month net.
Yeah.
Made 10 grand last month.
Yeah. You have to really consider, and honestly, for most teams in that box, it's actually like, I lost 5 grand this month.
Right.
I paid myself. I'm in debt now and I have to get out of it. I have to do a transaction just to pay my transaction coordinator because I didn't realize how far behind I was. Like, that's the grind. That's why I say, like, it's not meant for the faint-hearted, if you will. Like, you have to decide at 20, do I want this? Do I want that? Like, am I willing to go through the pain and suffering to get to the other side? Or am I happy just producing and making the most money I could possibly make? And that's a big decision there.
So I'm actually really curious that, because, obviously I know you and I know your business model pretty well, but I'm surprised to hear that one of your first hires wouldn't be like an inside sales person or something like that. So walk me through why you wouldn't recommend doing that.
Now, mainly for nowadays, because one, inside sales features more into that rainmaker model, right? Because you hire that person because you can control those listing appointments and you can do that production. Yep. They also come back into play at a large scale team where you can afford ISAs to be able to feed deals into your team. They work in different markets where pay-per-click is affordable and effective. Some markets they don't. And with the emergence of AI and how rarely, people are getting robo-dialed like crazy. ISAs are quickly losing effective natures like quite a bit right now. They're not as effective as they were 8 years ago. And so my advice now going forward would not be to hire that person. I would rather hire a VA to build out your database and build out more past client plans and like things that are going to create reoccurring transactions with people you already have in your database that will answer your calls than to cold call in the same way expireds and canceleds and sometimes even cold leads were 8 years ago. Still works, still a productive task, but it might not be your highest churning per dollar basis. And it makes you fat really quick when it comes to overhead.
I don't know that I disagree with you because, ISA sounds so sexy, right? It's like, oh my gosh, like I have I
got all these people calling.
It's like, oh my gosh, like I have all these. And by the way, like, for example, I'll give you one example of a lead source that I feel ISAs were really effective for. And that was my YouTube channel. So, I would have like 40 to 50 inbound leads from my YouTube every single month. And those leads were good. And they were like the right kind of leads for an ISA to call on, because they're texting in. So we're getting their cell phone numbers. But here's the thing. I'm the guy in the YouTube videos. So my conversion rate is way higher than the ISAs. And so that's like, even though the ISAs were effective with the YouTube, I still noticed a drop off when not just noticed, I like the data showed a drop off in conversion when I handed that off to inside sales. And not that, they followed the script.
So you get,
right, but
this is big. Like you get hit twice. So let me explain it. This is the number one thing I think teams leaders do a lot is they want to level up. And by leveling up, they actually hurt their bottom line. They do it all the time because they don't want it. They're lazy and they don't want to do a task anymore. Happens quite a bit. The only reason you would want to hire someone to take over a job that you're excelling at a high level is because you're going to use your time somewhere else that's going to create more revenue for your business than if you were to do that previous task. So the opportunity loss of not doing that task and going to do task B over here makes your company more money. But what ends up happening is people offset tasks to have a better quality of life or to have more freedom or do less work. So their laziness is what takes over their decision-making on staffing and actually reduces their profit line. So you said it there, your exact self. If you would have just kept on calling those people, your conversion rate would have been higher. You would have made more money for the company. So when you hire an ISA, now you're paying money to be less productive. So you better be doing something with your time that makes more money to offset that opportunity loss. 95% of the time, team leaders don't do anything with it. They just go golfing more often, which is another cost that just took on. Now, granted, I don't want to get in the argument with quality of life because I'm truly a big believer that I would rather have less money in my pocket and spend more time with my family and the things that I love.
Sure.
That's different because I can't put a value on that time spent.
100%.
However, if it's purely because you don't want to do that job anymore, you need to really evaluate what you're going to do instead, because there's no part of running a team or building a massive business that's super fun that you're in love with, because it's filled with highs and lows all the time. So sometimes the best use for people in their business is just do what they do great at, and they can keep doing great at to make the most amount of money until they figure out another task that they can do instead of that one that will help their business thrive even further.
I think that's great advice. And it's interesting because like I was saying before, aside from that one lead source, the ISA was relatively useless. Even calling through the database and, it's interesting because over the 2 years that I was using ISAs, month over month, we noticed drop-offs in pickup rate. The pickup rate just got lower and lower and lower and lower. And this is not, I suspect, just based off of conversations now with you, other team leads and stuff, this is not just like an industry issue. This is like a human behavior issue. People just aren't answering their phone anymore. Exactly. And by the way, like I think a great piece of advice that I got pretty early on, and something that like I still do to this day, is whenever I want to implement something in my business, I first ask myself, like, how would I behave on the receiving end of this action, right? Like if I'm going to do something to the consumer, like put myself in the consumer's shoes and monitor your own behavior and your own actions. I can't tell you the last time, Keith, that I picked up a phone call. Literally,
Yeah.
dude. Like
Dude,
even when you
get
call me, bro.
15
Like
calls
I
a
just,
day. I know. Seriously. I get like 15 to 20 calls a day. And if that phone number is not saved in my contacts, I'm not picking it up.
Absolutely not.
Like I'm not. They can leave me a voicemail. I don't have time for it. Now, I was thinking about this the other day. What would make me pick up that phone? It's if I knew who was calling and why. So I've also thought about the fact of like, I don't know if anybody's doing this, but like sending a pre-call text, like a text ahead and say, hey, I'm texting you because I'm going to give you a call in the next couple minutes. This is who I am. Because they're going to look at the text. Like nobody doesn't look at text. Like that's the difference. They look at text, they read them, they decide to respond or not. So if I send a pre-led text, I say, hey, this is Keith. I'm the team leader for such and such. I want to reach out. I need to chat to you about one of your listings or about something about business, whatever. I'm going to give you a call in the next couple minutes. If I'm taking it from my perspective. If I had someone text me that, I might answer the phone in the next couple, I might actually do it. Whereas if I just saw a random call, I'm not going to answer. It's going to go to voicemail and then they may leave me a text that I decide not to respond with. So, it's unique, but we got to start to internalize human nature. What do we do? What makes us answer the phone? What makes us to respond to texts? Why would we not copy what causes us as salespeople to do those things?
100%. Coming back to this, because now I'm looking at this and I'm kind of assessing what we've covered so far. So the first hire is some sort of transaction coordinator, which may evolve into transaction coordinator, likely per file, then hiring an admin that is going to take over the task slash TC. Now, I just want to kind of throw a caveat in here, or like an asterisk on that. And that is, and I'm sure that you would agree with me here, Keith. And if you don't, please interject. The biggest mistake that you can make as a team leader who is growing is hiring for where you're at as opposed to where you want to go. And so, for example, you just talked about an admin or a TC that is running 4 VAs. Okay, so that is not an average TC. That is not someone that's just good at pushing paper. That's someone who understands how to lead human beings, understands how to operate, like how to create systems and run systems. And so as an admin, your first admin hire, if all you're doing is hiring like a stay-at-home mom, not that there's anything wrong with that, but like someone who's just looking to phone it in, couple, 10, 20 hours a week. And then that's all they bring to the table. You're doing your business a disservice, because what you're going to do is you're going to have to train them. And then eventually you're going to outgrow them. And then they're going to be in a position where they're like, I no longer fit in with your vision or with where this company's going. And so what you did was you hired a TC who, whether you did it on purpose or not, purposefully or not, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt though, Keith, because you're a smart dude. You were probably like, dude, I'm going to hire someone who understands how to run systems, how to manage people, because that admin is really like it's a whole staff that is being run, staff of VAs that is being run by one mastermind. And that's brilliant because you're probably overpaying that TC person, right? Like what a normal TC would get paid, but they're saving you tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, because then you've got probably 4 VAs at 1,000 to 1,500 a pop a month, right? So you're like a 6,000 a month overhead. So so you're saving tons of cash by doing it that way.
Correct. Well, I would touch on this though. Something to keep in mind is that some people are made to be a part of your business for a certain time. There is people in your business on purpose. So although I do want to hire the best of the best, I can't always afford the best of the best. And that's okay, because I have to also be patient and understand that this person is only going to fit this hole for a certain amount of time. And if I'm a great entrepreneur and leader, I will outgrow them. And I have to know that I'm going to do that and put pressure on that person to either say they're either going to evolve with me or they may get left behind, and that's okay too. You have to be okay and embrace that. We went through 6 TCs before we found our last TC, but that was because our business kept evolving. The TCs we hired at the very beginning were definitely not the TCs that could ever handle what we're doing now. It's just not possible. So, I A great book, if anybody hasn't read it before, is The Hard Thing About Hard Things. I can't remember the author right now. A fantastic book about being a CEO, owner, and founder. The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
Ben Horowitz is the author.
Yes, Ben Horowitz. Fantastic book. If you are a team leader or a business owner, go get it right now. Like, that was great. And I took so much practical things from this book. One of the best ones that I, reflected on is when you're hiring executives, because we're at the level now where we hire COOs and CEOs and CTOs. Like, we're at that stage, right? Yep. Like running a massive company. And one of the big things about it was also talking about executives and hiring them. But I also self-reflected into the point of like, well, what executive am I, and what type of executive am I good for my company, and when am I not? And one of the things that he'd mentioned was about wartime and peacetime CEOs. And it's the same concept for almost any role in your business. There are times of peace in your company where it's a form of viability, where you don't want a wartime CEO. You don't need the war chest out to attack that marketplace at that given time. Mm-hmm. And you see a lot of companies do this all the time. And he gave like 5 or 6 different examples of companies shifting in and out of CEOs at the given time. He used Steve Jobs and Apple, for instance, right? Steve Jobs was a wartime CEO that he went to bat and he built and he grew and he scaled and he took people out. Whereas when Apple was in the time of peace, they had peacetime CEOs where Steve could go into a different facet of the business or a different era of his life to be able to scale certain things. And so you have to understand, what type of position are you hiring and for what length of time? It's the same concept of, you don't want to hire a high-level executive that knows how to run a Fortune 500 company when you're a startup. They might be an incredible CEO and cost you $300, $400, $500, $1 million a year, but they would absolutely suck at running a startup because they haven't done that. They're not built for that role. Like, their expertise is not made for that. In the same way that if a startup CEO it has all the talk and they know how to move on their feet and they do everything themselves, they would be terrible at running a Fortune 500 company because they don't know how to delegate the same way that a CEO would at that level. And so you have these concepts where you have to evolve as you scale and hire, but you also have to understand that the TC or the sales manager or the recruiter you hire when you're a 5 to 20 agent team is nowhere near the same person you're going to need to hire when you're 40, 80, 100 plus team of agents. And so that's the best advice I can give as you scale, is you have to be okay with potentially hiring someone that you know is not going to be a fit on your staff long-term, but they will help you get from point A to point B. And then you can start to see if that either that individual evolved and they're rising to the occasion, or you might need to start hiring that next person and make a switch. It's one of the toughest things about managing people and running a company is knowing that you're probably going to have to fire someone as soon as you hire them and get to the goal that you're trying to hit. And that's a really tough thought because, we're in control of a lot of people's jobs, but it's why we're entrepreneurs, is we have to be decisive and make those decisions when the time needs it. Yeah,
it's definitely an unspoken, reality. Some people are better at it than others. I can tell you that that is not something that came naturally to me, letting people go. I don't like disappointing people, but it's absolutely something that you need to do, because the longer you're doing them a disservice, right? Like if you're holding on to them and it's not working out, you're just delaying the inevitable. It's like holding on to a relationship that shouldn't be, you know what I mean? Like, we've all been there.
Yeah, you're both getting hurt.
Yeah, we've all been there. We've all been in the situation where should have been over 2 years ago, right? But
oh yeah, 100%.
But no one had the balls to end it. So, okay, this is very interesting. Another thing that I wanted to just kind of chime in here about, as you know, Keith, myself and Isaac, we run Large, which is a recruiting organization, and we help people recruit agents to their team. And one of the things that I've noticed consistently with the team leaders that we talk to are two different buckets of team leaders. There's the team leaders that are super excited about bringing new agents onto their team, and they're actually really super excited about recruiting in general. They're as many as, like you said, right? Just bring on as many as possible. And then there are the team leaders who are super selective. They're I don't want to grow too much. and I really only want experienced agents. I don't want to deal with the headache of like new agents, blah, 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 blah. And what I found to be true, and you almost started touching on this, but you didn't. The one thing that distinguishes the team leaders who are willing, ready, and able to take on any and all agents, and those who are quote unquote selective, or they're more exclusive. It actually has nothing to do with how good that team is. It has nothing to do with like the agent productivity. It has everything to do with whether or not they have two things. Number one, a built out onboarding and training program, right? A fully built out scale, like duplicatable onboarding training program where you can bring in 20 agents every single month. And it's the same as if you brought on 20 or one. Number one. And number two is if they have someone in place to handle the onboarding, the training, and the ongoing sales management. Now, to your point, at first, that could be you, right? If you outsource the recruiting.
It is.
Or that, it should be you, probably. Right? Exactly.
Yeah.
It should be you. Or, you can find someone else to do it. I actually got really lucky. One of the team members, when I started really going ham on recruiting, like he could see like, oh dude, like Danny's like bringing on like 5 agents a month. I had no plan, by the way. Yeah. I had no plan. I just started recruiting people. I was like, it'll work out, right? Like it's not like I had a training program already in place though. The training program was already in Kajabi, was all set, ready to go. SSV University it was done. But what I didn't have was like someone to like kind of like manage that. Luckily, I had someone on my team step up and offer to do that. Someone who is a very good coach, a very good trainer, naturally liked to see people succeed, and wasn't like, and was super patient, way more patient than I am, way more patient than I am, which is key for sales trainer. I got lucky there. I got really, really lucky. But to your point, like if you are handling the recruiting calls, which I was at the time, and you are also handling the training and the onboarding and the sales training, right? At some point that model breaks because your time will get stretched super thin, or you'll start to take silly shortcuts like group recruiting calls. Silliest thing in the world, in my opinion. Right? Like anyone who's like, oh, I'm going to just bring them all on like one, and I'm like, what are you doing?
You're not that.
Yeah, no, exactly. Because some other broker, some other sales manager from a Coldwell Banker office, no offense to Coldwell Banker agents who are, but like, I'm just using it as an example, right? So some other broker from a CB office who, got lucky, sent a mailer out, and that person called them, they got nothing else to do because that's all they do all day is to,
or a really good team that has a good recruiter or a team leader like me reaching out one-on-one and sitting down for coffee. Like, you're not going to a group interview.
You're smoked if you're
done. You're never going to win. So it's more about the competition. I agree. I think it's huge. Systems and processes are essential. I mean, obviously we're going to touch on a lot of that stuff in another playbook, which we're excited about. But like they're a staff that you don't pay for. It takes your time to get there, but systems and automation and process and all of those things is really staffing, just recorded or implemented. It's a staff in the old times that you would have to actually have someone do because there was no way to systemize or process that. You'd have to have an individual person doing all of that. And so that's a huge way to leverage, as well as like for recruiting, as we scale into that box, as you hire that, we just have an integrity like filter. Like we have a no assholes policy. And outside of that, if they have the desire and the willingness to work hard and try and earn it, then who am I to say that they can't succeed? Who am I to pick between two agents? Sometimes the agents that surprise us the most are the ones that end up having the most success. And I'm just like, I never would have guessed this. Like this is the last person I would have thought that would kill it. And now they're one of our better agents. Man. And so get a no asshole policy, get an integrity policy. You don't want liars and cheats and unhonest people. You want good people, no matter what type of personality they are, that just work as hard as they possibly can. And from there scale. But you also touched on one other thing. You said that a lot of team leaders, they don't want new agents. They don't want the headaches and all the issues. I'm here to say that experienced agents cause more issues, more headaches, and more pain and suffering.
1,000%. 1,000%.
100%. If you want to be able to teach someone, like, there's a reason it's called you can't teach old dogs new tricks. And same thing in real estate. Okay. You want puppies. You want little baby puppies coming in, killing the game, because guess what? That's who learns from the ground up good skills, good work ethic, and good time management. It's the agents that have been doing it. They've been doing it right for 25 years. Well, the hardest question that I have for a lot of those agents is, well, you've been doing it wrong for 25 years. You just haven't known it yet. And that's the hardest people to try and change habits for. And they also complain the most about splits and structure. They're the ones that complain the most about the way you do things and operate. Yep. They're the ones that create the most headaches. And they're the ones quickest to leave because things aren't built around them, that you're not focusing your entire business around this one experienced supreme agent that also makes you the least amount of money per file.
Right.
It's not worth it. So yeah, 100%. Recruiting is a numbers game. It's a volume game with good people. Yep. And good culture building, but that's
you hit it right on the head there. There are so many. Okay, I see so many team leaders make this mistake, and we're definitely going off tangent here. We'll bring it home in a second, but there are so many team leaders that make the mistake of using their recruiting conversation to filter people out, right? To do a mass filter, and it dumbfounds me. It's like the audacity for some of these people to think that within an hour they can, or 2 hours, or however much time they spend with these people, can determine with 100% certainty whether or not these people are going to have the tenacity to succeed in real estate. Because you cannot I know people who are dumb who sell a lot of real estate. I know people who are all sorts of this whole like, oh, we're going to disprofile our way into success. Like, you're done. Okay.
It's another lazy approach. Mm-hmm. Again, everybody wants to find ways to do less work in their mind.
So, if they're
at the end of the day, the best way is to just grind it out and build a volume place. Dude. It's the same people that really focus on like price point, like demographic process for selling real estate. It's like, just help anyone and everyone that comes close to you, and you will build a great business, because you don't know who they're going to refer, what connections they're going to create for your life. You just don't know.
Yeah. And I will
serve people, and that's all it takes.
Yep. And I will say this, that it's almost like the people who don't have the training and the onboarding programs to support agents at scale are usually the ones that use recruiting to filter the people out, because people, real estate team leaders who have done this long enough and who have had, groups of agents go through their training program will start to realize that the training program itself is the recruiting process, meaning that will filter them out for you. That will filter them out for you.
Yeah. Correct. I'm all for it. It's 100% true. You throw 20 people down a funnel and 12 come out the other side and are producing agents. Right. That's way better than throwing 5 and then being wrong and 3 people come out the other side.
Yeah, 100%. Man, I couldn't agree more. And, just to put a bow on all of this, because we're coming up on time. I don't know that we necessarily got through like all of the entire roadmap, so to speak, right? But we definitely got to like, hey, how do we get from 0 agents to through the valley of death, right? And on the other side, which is by your definition, 20 to 40 agents and or 20 plus deals a month.
40 agents. Right. I would say 40 agents and 20 plus transactions, because 20 to 40 is the valley of death that you need to get through. So I would say you need to get to 40 plus active agents on your team before you feel sufficient enough to be in another form of viability. Like, that's the next plateau.
Yep. Now, question, in a higher price point market, right? We're talking 20 deals a month. Well, here's the thing, right? In a higher price point market,
this doesn't work. I mean, it doesn't work in a high price point. Like, the team model I'm describing works for 85% of all normal human beings that are in those buckets. And I say that jokingly, because like, if you live in New York, if you live in like high-rise Miami, if you're living in LA and Silicon Valley, like you're not doing this model. Like this model doesn't make sense. You can't scale out a massive luxury team. Like it doesn't feasibly make sense because of the relationships and the drivers around. You need less transactions and less overhead and more value, right? Like, so the scalability team works in about 85 to 90% of metro markets in the country. It's the most common, form of growth. But if you're in a specialized high price point marketplace, you've got to build it differently. Like you have your own playbook that's going to be drastically different.
I have seen, it's like, for example, like we know a couple of people in like San Diego now who run really successful teams. I'm from Silicon Valley, dude. And to be honest, like no one's cracked the code. There's people that claim to have cracked the code, but I know I've heard enough about, what their P&Ls look like to know that like it's all a fraud.
Yeah.
And, in terms of like other markets too, like, you look at New York, you think, okay, well, Sirhan's certainly crushing it, but he's not really running.
He's doing okay.
Yeah. He's not running this model.
He's a Rainmaker model. Like, again, it changes in those high price point models. The best form of income is a personal brand Rainmaker model, because you can do multi-million dollars worth of deals and make 10 times more money than a team leader could ever running against their whole team. Like you really can. And so that's why, and even some of the teams like in San Diego and those marketplaces, they're similar in play. The difference is that 120, it's not 120, it's 40. Like the number of agents it just shrinks a little bit because you don't need as many transactions. It's also why you see massive volume numbers come from these teams, and they look like they're the best teams in the marketplace, but they're doing vastly less transactions, which can help, but then also operating costs and staffing and a lot of these other things are more expensive. So when we dive deep on profitability between teams, it all differs. I would think that some of the nicest profitability margins are going to be high transaction teams in really low cost of living marketplaces that can scale out with less competition. Like, send me to North Dakota and let me rip. And it would be a completely different mindset than if you're in Phoenix or LA. Like sometimes the flashiest things are not the most profitable or successful. Sometimes the most profitable boxes of business are in the least flashy places on the planet where there's need.
100%, man. And I think that's a great place to leave off, because I think that's a perfect way to end this. But before we go, one final nugget for the audience back at home. Let's say, someone is listening to this right now and they're like, maybe they got a buyer's agent, maybe they've got a TC, but they're starting that journey. What's one final piece of advice that they haven't already gotten from this show that they need to hear right now?
Don't rush out of production. Just don't rush out of it. There's no rush to leave all that income there. There's really not. It's a lot easier to regret getting out of production early than there ever will be a concept of like, man, I sold too many houses too long and I made too much money down the stretch. Like I should have definitely took a pay cut quicker. Like that's my biggest regret when we did our team is I got out of production in 7 months very quickly for the team. Granted, we've run this awesome organization now. I'm very thankful and very happy about it. Had I spent an extra year generating revenue and stashing myself up an investment portfolio that gave us a little bit more security down the stretch of building the big company, I would have been a lot better off right now when it comes to making good decisions based on the business and not based on finances. So the best thing I could say, don't rush out of production just because it's the flashy, cool thing to do, or because you're tired and lazy and you don't want to sell houses anymore. Don't make that decision based off of that. Make it off of a need to get out of business, not a rush to do so.
I love that, man. And honestly, I think that's phenomenal advice. As someone who's been there myself, I can absolutely say that I wish I had someone giving me that advice, because I basically got the exact opposite advice. And yeah, same thing. It totally burned me. So yeah, man, this was awesome. Keith, you're like the Doc Brown of real estate, dude.
Let's make it happen, man. Let's keep it going. We're excited. We're going to help a lot of people this year. I'm excited to be able to empower a lot of team leaders live and just make their business better and just help them thrive. So excited for this year, and I'm excited for Refuge.
All right, man. Sounds great.